Gettysburg Museum of History Studios.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
I swear. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Addressing Gettysburg. Today, we are talking about something that we like to revisit often on this show because, when you're talking about war and battles that employ guns and blades, you're going to talk about wounds. That's an important part of a war, right? That's what it's about. And unfortunately, that's what it's about. And, during the Civil War, we decided, hey, we should try to save as many of these guys as we can. And they took great notes, photographs, diagrams, all these things. And a friend of ours who's been on the show before, Dr. Craig Miller, has a Facebook page now called Civil War Wounds and Surgery.
Medicine.
Surgery. Damn it. See, I was trying to go off the top of my head, and I didn't want to write it down because I'm like, I could remember that. Anyway, medicine, and there's an ampersand in there as well. And we're going to talk about a lot of, not a lot, but I think what you're going to find to be interesting wounds. I hope you do, because I found them to be interesting. So you're going to be really bored if you don't find them interesting like I did. But anyway, Dr. Craig Miller, thank you very much for coming on the show. Welcome.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You are a vascular surgeon.
Correct.
And that is a surgeon who operates on blood vessels.
Right.
And so I would imagine that is, you have to have a very intimate knowledge of anatomy when you're dealing with blood vessels, because there's a lot of them.
Certainly helps.
They go all over the place.
They do indeed.
They don't have a Garmin for navigating that, do they? Yet? No, right? You have to just know.
No, I'll tell you what, something very interesting when I started to get deep into this particular topic of Civil War surgery. If you look at and this dovetails nicely, we hadn't even talked about doing this. If you look at the surgical textbooks that were out in the early 1860s, sort of in anticipation for the conflict that was coming, they have a lot of anatomic diagrams, not so much of dissections as you would for an anatomy class, but of surgical approaches. And there's a whole chapter in one of these books that contains anatomic drawings, depictions of surgical approaches to the blood vessels. And to my utter astonishment, when I first started looking at this, they're essentially identical to what ours are.
Really?
In other words, in the 1850s, when they're putting these together, the surgical approaches to the blood vessels were the same ones that we use now. And the drawings are fantastic. They look like they could have come from a modern textbook. The difference, of course, was that they didn't have reconstructive options. At that point, the exposures of arteries, for example, was specifically to tie them off.
Okay, stop
just
bleeding.
To ligate them. Yeah,
right.
That was it.
Yeah.
But their approach to get down there was very systematic and made perfect sense, avoiding structures, avoiding nerves, avoiding other blood vessels to get to where you needed to go.
Really?
And now we get down there, and of course we do bypasses, or we do enterectomies, or other sorts of things. And a lot of stuff we do from outside the body. But I thought that was a revelation to me that these guys, it's part of the larger process of recognizing that the whole sort of sawbones myth that's out there is
not true.
Garbage.
I'm glad you're doing that, because I think we live in an age now, especially with Civil War history, where people are taking a different approach to, they're revisiting a lot of these things that we just kind of took for granted as being one way. The sawbones stereotype, for example. I thought that too. And when I thumb through medical books and I see these intricate diagrams, you've got to dissect a body to make those diagrams, and that's a lot of work, and that's a lot of thought that's going into that. And it's not, sawbones wouldn't do that.
No.
And I'm sure there were sawbones, but for the most part, they seem to be certainly not as advanced as we are now in our medical knowledge, but they certainly were trying and they were advanced for their time.
they didn't have a grasp of physiology the way we do now, and certainly things like molecular biology and all that sort of, they didn't have any way of knowing about that. But gross anatomy, which is anatomy that you see with your eyes, it may or may not be gross in the vernacular sense. Oftentimes it is. Yeah. But they were within a spitting distance of what we know.
Yeah.
I mean, because they could do all of that and had done it when that's what you got. You get pretty good at it, and consequently they did. One of my colleagues, when I was announcing, a year or so ago that I was starting to work in this direction, made a remark like, "Well, isn't that all they did was amputations?" And I, at the time, I wasn't too sure. Now I recognize it. No, and even if you just look at amputations, there's a level of complexity there that doesn't really. Hasn't made it through to our understanding at large. I'm going to give you an example because there's one case that we're going to talk about. It's Robeson, the guy from the 2nd Massachusetts, hitting the hip, takes a shot to the hip, and we can go into the actual case later. But so if you look at how at that period they broke down wounds of that nature, let's look at just the thigh wounds.
Okay.
Gunshot wound to the thigh, right? They broke those down, first of all, into 3 different anatomic segments: the middle of the femur, the top part of the femur up by the hip, the bottom part of the femur down by the knee. And they did that because they recognized that a wound to the middle part of the femur is probably not going to involve the major joints, the knee and the hip, whereas ones that are lower down very likely will involve some kind of injury to the knee. So you got to put them in different categories because you want to potentially address them differently. Mm-hmm. So, okay. Gunshot wound to the thigh. Well, there's 3 different areas of the thigh now. So we've already gotten it from 1 wound to 3 different types of wounds. And then you talk about what the treatment might be for that. Well, there's 3 different types of treatment for a gunshot wound at that time. You got amputation, where you remove the damaged limb, obviously. You've got resection, which is where you remove the damaged segment of the bone only, but leave the rest of the limb intact. Okay. And then the third one is not to operate at all and to treat it what they would call, and we do too, expectantly or conservatively. They would just do dressing changes and sort of supportive care. So we're not going to operate.
What about extraction? Like what if it's just the meaty part of the leg or something and they're able to extract the bullet, or would they leave it?
No, they would try and take that's a totally separate issue from what I'm talking about right now.
Gotcha. You're talking about bones.
Let's just talk about bone because soft tissue is going to be a different thing.
Okay.
And parenthetically, the bullets, from their perspective, bullets got to come out. If you can potentially do it, get it out of there because they consider that to be a source of inflammation, which was a different definition of inflammation from what we have now. But I'm getting off of my point. So let's say you got then 3. We're still talking about gunshot wound to the thigh involving the bone. So instead of 1 entity, now you've got 3 different anatomic places in which you can do one of 3 different things, broadly speaking. So now we've got a matrix of 9 different things, right? But the amputation could be either done with the circular method, which we can talk about the difference between a circular method and the flat method. So now the amputation, you've doubled the different possibilities there, right? And now let's look at the temporal relationships of these things, because what they would call primary amputation, and we're just talking about amputations now, but we can also go into resections, definitely not the wound dressings. 3 different time periods. The first is called primary. If you can do it within the first 48 hours, they recognize, especially with amputation, that the outcomes would be better for that. If you couldn't do it within, or you didn't do it within the first 48 hours, if you did it after 30 days, that was called secondary. And then in between 48 hours and the end of that 30-day period was called intermediate. So now we've got, 18 different possibilities for thigh gunshot wounds. It can be amputation, it can be resection, it can be conservative management. Under amputation, you could do it circular or you could do it with a flap. You could do it primary, secondary, or intermediate. So now you've got all these different things. Primary, secondary, and intermediate time courses also apply to the excision operation. Can you do an excision within the first 48 hours? Do you do an excision within the first? So now we're at a matrix of 30 different possibilities between amputation, resection and conservative management for just the thigh.
Yeah.
And we're not talking about any, now move it up to the knee, or move it down to the knee, move it down to the ankle, to the leg, which is what they would call from the knee down, chest. And then you start extrapolating to all the different anatomic areas and recognize that when you're on that battlefield, out at Spangler's Farm or whatever, and somebody comes onto the table who's been selected by the triage people that needs an amputation, that doesn't mean that the decision's over. You got a bunch of decisions to make. So the level of complexity is much higher.
And you're exhausted. Going back to the last time you were on with sleep deprivation, right? These surgeons have got to be exhausted. They are exhausted. They're not getting sleep. And you got to you got a guy coming on the table with a thigh wound, and now you have 30 options that you can go through. And, but you got 20 more guys writhing and moaning, waiting to be seen. I mean, the pressure on these surgeons.
A lot of time, the fact that you got those other 20 or 200 that also need something done would drive the decision making, because you might look at somebody. Rosen's a good case, actually, where the surgeon looked at it and said, I don't want to amputate this guy at the hip. He's 22 years old, whatever he was, in his early 20s. If I amputate this guy at the hip, his life is just devastated, obviously. Should I do a resection? In that case, he did. But what about the sort of the rank and file when you got hundreds and hundreds of cases? Amputation might take 8 or 10 minutes. The resection operation might take an hour. You don't have that time. It's much more complicated surgical technique than just doing an amputation. So
right,
a lot of times, we just got to amputate because I don't have the time to do a resection on that patient because I got 200 more that need to be done in that primary time period.
Yeah.
And the last thing they're thinking about is sleep.
I mean, I'm not by any means a human anatomy expert, but I have eaten leg of lamb. And so I'm assuming that the femur is surrounded by muscle.
Yeah. And
so if I'm going to do a resection of a section of the femur, I have to cut through that muscle, which is,
substantial.
Yeah. And then I have to cut that section of bone out. Well, I mean, that does sound like it would take a little longer to do. My question with the resection, and we years ago, we had the late Rick Schrader on, and he was an orthopedic surgeon. Yeah, he was the first one. That's where I first learned about resections. And I know I asked this then, and I don't remember the answer, but if I'm missing a chunk of my femur, how am I walking? Or
poorly. You're walking very poorly. And in fact, by the end of the war, even before the end of the war, the conventional wisdom was not to do resections in the lower extremities. But you'll still see pictures of people from after the war that were compiled by the War Department and the medical department of the Army, where you'll see people who did survive that operation, and you'll see many more in the upper extremities, but there are some in the lower where you'll see there's this kind of weird leg hanging there. What's happening? Is
it completely useless, or does the rest of the bone structure and muscular structure compensate?
It depended on the individual, because in some cases, yes, it was just something they dragged around and it was awful, and they'd even sometimes go back and have it amputated.
Right.
Just
be like, get this off me.
It's just in the way. Yeah.
Oh my God.
But
that's awful.
Sometimes the thing would develop in between the areas of, say you've got some bone here and you've got bone here, but you've taken out the damaged part there. Sometimes the body would fill in with fibrous tissue. It was called pseudoarthrosis, which means false joint. And it would fill in with stuff that would sort of take the place of cartilage, it was more like cartilage that would take the place of the bone and allow you to do a little bit of movement and motion. And that happened in the upper extremities too, where you'll see the pictures. You've seen, I'm sure, a bunch of pictures of guys where there's no shoulder.
Like a deflated balloon.
Yeah, there's no shoulder there.
Yeah.
But yet they could actually do some stuff. It wasn't the same as having a natural arm, of course, but they could do some
small things.
Yeah, because of this phenomenon of pseudoarthrosis that had taken place.
That's fascinating. I didn't know about that. Okay, let's get on to some cases. As Addressing Gettysburg celebrates its 8th year bringing Gettysburg to you in unique and creative ways, we want to take this moment to thank our patrons. The only reason we've been able to last this long is because our patrons have supported our efforts since 2019. And we can do a lot more if you join the ranks of the original Gettys nerds by going to patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. Oh, and you can hear the rest of this episode over there too.